Disrate Studios is a one-person indie horror developer that specializes in making PSX-style horror games that specifically have the aesthetics of liminal spaces and the 90s as a decade. Disrate Studios' style more strictly hones in on horror titles that have low-poly models and have graphics akin to what we would see on the PlayStations 1 and 2. Their unique execution of 90s-style horror focuses on, you guessed it, slasher games typically in which a player tries to reach a certain endpoint while trying to avoid an entity that's trying to kill them, at least judging from the two games they have out, the first of which is Bughouse. And no, it doesn't involve insects or any kind of small crawling creatures if any of you are wondering. We're looking for creeps, not crawlers. Shout out to Nico for introducing this developer to us. Bughouse is a game that's been released very recently and revolves around a boy named Christopher who's a kid that's been left home alone. Or is he? As Christopher, the player must find a way out of the house before the slasher kills them and must also try to piece together the sequence of events that led up to this. The player starts off in a bedroom, probably a child's, and soon after the player spawns, text pops up instantly to the point where if you jolt easily, you could consider this a jump scare. You best hope you don't end up landing a job working with MS Word. Anyway, it informs the player that not only can light switches be turned on and off in this house, but the darkness could be used to evade any threats, which is pretty cool considering this is one of the very few games in which you're actually supposed to go into the dark. However, the game won't give you a loan without wanting interest back, so having too many light switches on at one time may trigger a power cut, and the player can use the light to see better. Side note, this does actually have a basis in reality, since Nico says he can't have his coffee machine and microwave on at the same time, or else he gets an outage, so take from that what you will. Succeeding this, the player could choose to open the closet door to find a flashlight and find what are probably Christopher's drawings illustrating certain events and themes in his life. Another item the player can find in the closet is Christopher's diary, the contents of which we don't want to spoil for you here, so we're just going to encourage you to just play or watch for yourselves. Soon after, the power will shut off, and it's the player's objective to restore it. Once the player gets to the fuse box, yet another text display comes up detailing how the power can also turn off by the storm outside acting up. The power turning off will disable the electrical equipment, but the player can't just play the entire game with the power off because Christopher's sanity will drain rapidly until the power turns back on again. I have no idea where this kid lives, but the local residents of this area should transfer the operations to a more competent corporation or to government officials that can handle things better, because I wouldn't be paying a penny if I can't have my PC, Xbox, refrigerator, and massage machine on at the same time. Anyway, this is real knowledgeable game design by Disrate, because this makes it to where the player can't just play in the dark the whole time and turn off the flashlight when the killer comes after them. The player also has a checklist to do, which includes cleaning the dirt off the floor, doing the dishes, doing the laundry, putting the food into the dog bowl, and taking the pills. Yeah, there's just dirt on the floor for some reason. We don't know what the dirt consists of, but feel free to take guesses at your own dispensation. The player will eventually have to play hide and seek with the killer, and it's pretty much scripted that the killer gets the player at least once. Afterwards, the house will turn into a derelict and dilapidated ruin of what it once was, and if the player gets killed again, they'll wake up in a padded cell with a note on the floor. If they evade the killer long enough to where a door moves up far enough to where the player can fit into it, will get the good ending. So with everything taken into account, this game is very good considering the fact that it was made by a one-person indie development team and is expansive as it is. It's got some pretty unique mechanics in and of itself, because not only does it have the option to hide in the dark from the killer, but it also doesn't let the player use this ability to where this game is broken. And in addition to this, it's not typical for indie developers to implement radically different endings. We not only like how polar the different endings were in terms of their outcomes, but we also really enjoy the early 2000s vibe of going down a house's hallway knowing you're gonna get spooked at some point. And the cherry on top of the sundae, seasoned with dirt of a questionable substance, is the fact that they were so thoughtful as to let us play a game of hide and seek in the middle of the actual game. What a wonderful developer. They're gonna make big projects. One day. The game begins with an employee at some sort of office complaining about how they have to work the night shift at a 911 call center because it's boring and lonely. They bring up an example of someone who's probably an old lady whose biggest event she's got to look forward to is Social Security rolling in, who called the previous night regarding her cat in a tree. Well, your osteoporosis isn't our fault, lady. Goodbye. Or at least that's what we would say. Anyway, the worker suggests that some people have no lives, just like nerds who play video games, and those kinds of people, none of those here. Wouldn't that be, crazy? Right off the bat, we're given a puppet combo vibe with the walls warping relative to the movement of the player. The player is then prompted to get a water before going to work, and is then prompted to sit at the computer. The player then gets a prank call from a bar with the person on the other end of the line saying they need the fire department because there's a smoking hot babe. The player is eventually supposed to hang up, and we'd be glad if we were in that position and all we were getting is prank calls because we wouldn't have to do any actual work. The player then gets a call and asks a few questions before the person on the other line screams and then hangs up. The player then gets another call regarding 4 kids trespassing at a slaughterhouse, and the player immediately sends help their way. Apparently, during the sequence of events, an officer's body was found mutilated to death at the scene because he hadn't reported back in a while. The player eventually plays as the officer named M. Andrews, and this is where the actual game begins. His wife is also dying. Apparently, the most uninformed workers are concentrated into one city because there's nothing we'd do quicker than take some time off if our wife is gonna die in months. That's our doom avoided. After the player enters the slaughterhouse, Andrews will then get static from the dispatch, and as you guessed, the player has come through a one-way door. The player has to search through one of the 3 toilets in a bathroom to get a door handle, and after opening the door, the player is able to crawl through vents, which will eventually lead the player to a boiler room or industrial area, the interior of which kinda looks like a sugar tunnel. The game is really non-linear, so keep in mind the sequence of events may not go exactly like this if you choose to play the game. Subsequently, the player is tasked with getting a valve wheel and using it to stop the flow of hot steam blocking a passageway. A few narrow passageways later, the player is jump scared by a killer who looks like Jason, but only if he ate fried butter on a daily basis. In terms of the game's aesthetic and map, we really like the premise for this game. Being a cop on the run from the antagonist in some sort of warehouse underground is definitely something we've seen before, but its map and textures don't look like anything we can remember, and we know our audience can draw some congruencies, but it does seem like there's been originality put into its design. And speaking of its design, we love how the experience is deep and really non-linear because we only know of this one process to getting to the end, and there may be a litany of more methods out there. It's a pretty short demo, but we'd be deceiving you if we didn't think this was promising. Oh, and that FBI screen was hella convincing. We greatly look forward to seeing what Disrate has coming in the future, because if you know us, there's nothing we like more than placating our audience with games in the style of a certain developer that includes things such as PSX style graphics, low poly player models, VHS aesthetics, slasher type material, and anything remotely associated with cheaply made B-movies. Some project that taps into the formula of running from an impending doom, we stan. But honestly, folks, if you're into these kinds of games, then we'd recommend going to Disrate's website, Twitter, and YouTube. Links in the description. We're gonna take about a week and a half off, and we're gonna have a lot of content for you then. Thanks for watching.